everyone. Welcome to Unconfirmed, the podcast that reveals how the marquee names in crypto are reacting to the week's top headlines and gets the inside scoop on what they see on the horizon. I'm your host, Laura Shin. You may have heard, I'm doing a survey. We want to know, how do you think we can make the show better? How would you like to see Unchained and Unconfirmed expand? If you could just take a moment and go to surveymonkey.com/r/Unchained survey 2019. That's surveymonkey.com/r/Unchained survey 2019. Your answers will be a huge help to me and my team here at Unchained and Unconfirmed. Also, those who answer the survey can enter to win one of 5 free Casa Bitcoin Lightning notes, plus a free year of Casa's Gold membership, including a multi-sig security app for iPhone and Android, a Trezor hardware wallet, a Casa Faraday bag, and 24/7 support. Those of you interested in learning more about Casa or about protecting your Bitcoin investment generally should check out my interview with CEO Jeremy Welch. Thank you to Casa for donating.
Are you ready for global cryptocurrency money laundering regulations? CipherTrace secures the crypto economy with powerful AML tools for exchanges, crypto businesses, and regulators.
Today's guest is Dante Disparte, Head of Policy and Communications for Libra. Welcome, Dante.
Thank you, Laura. Happy to be on the program.
You've had a big week. For those listeners who were under a rock earlier this week, Facebook unveiled its plans for its cryptocurrency, Libra. Dante, just to make things clear for listeners, can you distinguish between the roles of Facebook, Libra, and Calibra in this system?
Sure. So at the outset, I work for Libra Association. So I had policy and communications for the association. And the association is comprised today of 28 founding members, including Facebook. You have groups like Visa, MasterCard, Uber, Lyft, social impact partners like Kiva, Women's World Banking, Mercy Corps, among others. And that's going to be a continually growing list of founding partners of the association. The association will do 3 primary things in this project. The first is to provide overall governance. The second is to provide a reserve feature and treasury feature backing every Libra digital currency. And the third is to manage the technology roadmap as an open source blockchain project. So those are the 3 roles of the association. Facebook, of course, as a founding partner and really the firm that has helped incubate this project, has been driving the early technology development, but has now shifted that as an open source project under the association. And Facebook has also simultaneously launched its own digital wallet called Calibra, which will be an on-ramp that will facilitate access to Libra and payments through Libra across its multitudes of platforms, such as WhatsApp, Messenger, and as a standalone solution.
And within the Libra Association, there's the association itself, the council, and the board. Can you also differentiate those for listeners?
Yeah, so like any nonprofit organization, especially one with this type of governance structure, and the vision ultimately is to do 2 things. One is to create a simple global currency and a financial infrastructure that can empower billions of people. An assignment that big and a mission that big, of course, requires governance and leadership. So the board of the association will be kind of an ultimate governance body that will, each member of that group will have the same vote, the same weight. There's no proportionality to that. It's really meant to be very democratic and require 1/3 votes on certain decisions relating to the digital currency, the reserve features, and governance. And that really just ensures that there's an equal weighting in that coalition. A council as well effectively would sort of mirror the type of governance that you see in these types of associations around the world, that will stay a little bit closer to the action from an operational point of view. And those 2 organizations and bodies here are still in the design phase of a charter for the association, as well as the search for an overall head, a managing director, if you will, to drive the organization. So it's very early days yet.
And tell us more about yourself, your background, and how you came to be in this role.
Yeah, so it's such a fascinating journey, as you know, Laura. At first, when you first encounter blockchain and cryptocurrencies, it requires a suspension of disbelief, especially when you think about our economy and our financial and political systems. They tend to be heavily centralized. They tend to be very opaque. They tend to be friction laden. And so when you first encounter this technology, you of course you go down the rabbit hole very, very fast. And so in my case, you and I first met on Necker Island back in 2017. An important year, I think, for blockchain, but also an important year for the world, as Puerto Rico, where I'm from, was flattened by a series of hurricanes, as was Necker Island. And all of a sudden, the urgency of moving to a world that was more equitable, that created more opportunity, and where you could sort of leverage technology to drive social impact, it just stopped being abstract for me. And so from then, I've spent, courtesy of your kind introductions, I spent the last 24 months chronicling the development of this technology in Forbes, and then working really hard to make it acceptable in the halls of power around the world. So, lo and behold, here I stand before cameras trying to defend crypto and blockchain in front of the entire planet.
And I just out of curiosity was wondering, because you have been based in DC for a long time, will you be moving to Geneva for this role?
Yeah, that is the plan. And candidly, other than my wife indicating that I always score expatriate opportunities in cold countries, I'm very much excited to moving to Switzerland and to Geneva specifically. So I will be taking up the assignment based out of Geneva with the headquarters. And clearly the goal there is to be very much plugged into civil society and to international organizations, which would call Geneva home, so that this becomes as much a global project and not a U.S.-centric effort.
And just to fill listeners in, I think you had previously also lived in Denmark, which is maybe what you meant about the cold country.
Exactly. I lived in Denmark for nearly 7 years, where most expats don't last but a couple. So I have a great affinity for Europe, and looking forward to living there again.
So what's your response to the number one concern that's being expressed about Libra, which is that Facebook, which has a poor track record regarding privacy, is now launching a system that will have financial data on billions of people, potentially? Well,
so there's a general tendency on the planet, which of course hasn't spared any organization or any institution, marked by a really, really precipitous decline in institutional trust. The Edelman Trust Barometer picks this up, and it's true of public, for-profit, nonprofit organizations the world over. So I think there's a broad megatrend on the planet around institutional trust and a decline in institutional trust. For my part, I wouldn't want to be a part of an organization or project that would only amplify that erosion of trust. And I think at the design level, when you really, really start to, intuit what is being built here and how it is being built, and how Facebook, and by virtue of the association, has really put great checks and balances on its power, this is as close as you can get to creating something that can serve ultimately as a public good. So I think there's a huge opportunity at a high level to really expand finance and its capabilities. In response to the direct question about trust and the commingling of personal data, payment data, and social media data, part of the reason I think Facebook has established a separate subsidiary that would be registered and regulated like a financial institution would is to create a clear firewall between payment information and personally identifiable information. And the association itself understands clearly that we don't exist in a vacuum of financial regulations. So, I've been incredibly eager to continue the dialogue with regulators and policymakers around the world, where I think, frankly, blockchain and cryptocurrencies go a long way further than traditional fiat currencies in the issues regulators care about, like anti-money laundering, fraud, traceability, this type of opportunity. Blockchain does more for that than self-reporting, which we typically see from financial institutions.
Yeah, I think the one concern is that even though Calibra will be a subsidiary, that because the wallets will be rolled out on Messenger and WhatsApp, that kind of just immediately out of the gate gives Calibra potentially, the same kind of reach and power as Facebook, at least in terms of the amount of data that it can collect and, its financial data. So I think, and then to have sort of the DNA of Facebook managing that data, I wonder if that's also part of the concern. Like this is meant to be an open system and other companies eventually should be able to build on it, et cetera. But there's only really one entity that has the kind of reach, other than maybe like a WeChat or something.
I think if you look at the composition of the 28 founding members in total, you have organizations that often are in direct competition with one another, whether it's Visa and MasterCard or Uber and Lyft. You have companies like Vodafone, which of course have great opportunities in terms of mobile payments and penetration in different geographies around the world. Mercado Pago in Latin America. So, even at the beginning of this effort, which we, of course, acknowledge with the humility it deserves, this is a very, very long arc and a long-term project that we're embarking on. There's an acknowledgement that it has to drive competition, that the technology has to meet the most scrupulous standards of being an open source technology, and that on top of that, there has to be, competition, healthy competition. And so if you think about what Libra really is aspiring to do and what the Libra blockchain is empowering the world to do, it is to do for payments and money transfer what the internet did for communication and information sharing. And so, naturally at the outset, pulling on board the opportunities that each of those 28 founding members represent, the types of use cases, the types of innovations they will see, and the on and off ramps into Libra, we will move, hopefully, finance and payments into a new terrain without sacrificing the trust and the type of security you and I take for granted.
We're going to talk more about what the scale of this project means for users and governments in a moment, but first a quick word from our fabulous sponsors.
Ready or not, the Financial Action Task Force anti-money laundering recommendations soon go into effect globally. If you handle cryptocurrencies, no matter where you do business, these new AML laws will apply to you. CipherTrace helps exchanges, ICOs, funds, brokerages, and regulators understand and manage crypto asset and compliance risks. Learn how to reduce your exposure and prepare now for tough new regulations. CipherTrace is securing the crypto economy. Learn more at ciphertrace.com/unconfirmed.
Hey everyone, don't forget Unchained is doing a survey, and if you give us your feedback, you can be entered to win some pretty awesome prizes. We want to know, how do you think we can make the show better? How would you like to see Unchained expand? Please take a moment and go to surveymonkey.com/r/Unchained survey 2019. That's surveymonkey.com/r/Unchained survey 2019. It won't take long, I swear, and when we get all your feedback, Unchained will be even better than before. What more could you want than that? Okay, there is something more you could want. You could maybe want to win some of the prizes we're giving out to survey respondents. You could be one of the 5 lucky people to win a free Casa Bitcoin Lightning node, plus a free year of Casa's Gold membership, including a multi-sig security app for iPhone and Android, a Trezor hardware wallet, a Casa Faraday bag, and 24/7 support. Those of you interested in learning more about Casa or about protecting your Bitcoin investment generally should check out my interview with CEO Jeremy Welch. Thank you to Casa for donating. Again, the URL is surveymonkey.com/r/Unchained survey 2019. Go there now to give us your thoughts on the future direction of Unchained and enter the giveaway. Back to my conversation with Dante Disparte of Libra. The Senate has called a hearing on Libra, and the French finance minister has said that Libra must not become a sovereign currency. How do the Libra Association and Facebook intend to overcome any governmental obstacles? Like if a government or if governments request changes to the design of the network between now and launch, will you accommodate those?
Well, what clearly conversations leading up to the announcements that have dominated the headlines over the last couple of days, conversations with regulators and policymakers have been ongoing. I note, of course, general positive sentiments, if you will, from some of the central bankers around the world, which have expressed that, there is a clear utility for this type of solution, that it has to be designed with the right sensibilities and with the right reflection of macroprudential standards, an area of personal sort of expertise and understanding for me. But let's also push back a little bit on the question of, many are going to be asking, and many have asked, what are the risks if this project succeeds? Let me explain what are the risks if we fail. Today, finance and our current economy and the way we organize things, primarily using analog systems, has left 1.7 billion people without access to a bank. A rough equal number are on the margins. They're underbanked. 40% to 50% of the American public can't withstand a $400 financial setback. And all of it, in no small measure, is born out of a system that has to do checks and balances and KYC and anti-money laundering checks in a largely manual, self-reporting way, and largely in networks and payment networks that aren't interoperable with one another. So as a consumer, the second you are on the wrong side of the perimeter of your current financial institution, you get fees, death by 1,000 cuts, if you will, through fees. That happens when you travel and you use an outside ATM network. It happens when you want to wire money all over the world. There's a 10 to 7% fee structure on remittances. And so, at some level, you need these uncommon coalitions to form around these enormous social problems. And figure out how to redefine what banking means to reach that last mile. That's one way I think the planet has a chance to address the root causes of instability. And regulators, frankly, and policymakers all over the world care about economic competitiveness and addressing income inequality. Here we have an opportunity to do that.
Well, so one thing that was a little bit curious to me. So I was noting that the videos and other marketing material make it clear that Facebook really is targeting that developing world. And yet here we have India's talking about banning public cryptocurrencies. Facebook and WhatsApp are banned in China. Those are probably some of the biggest markets there. So how does Facebook plan to get adoption in its target audience?
So I can't comment directly at all about what Facebook's plans are and how they would
the
sort
Libra
of address
Association.
that. But and the association as well really operates outside of any direct customer interaction, partly because this would be governed at the country and jurisdiction level. The aims are to build an infrastructure that serves to empower billions of people financially and pull them into the on-ramps of economic opportunity. But that has to be done clearly in very, very close consultation with partners and companies and developers and nonprofit organizations and others that would be able to plug in jurisdictionally and nationally to make this a reality. Back to the numbers that I gave you a moment ago. Of that 1.7 billion, there's roughly 1 billion people on the planet who have access to mobile telephony and mobile data, which at some level, especially when you think about the power of blockchain and sort of these types of opportunities, is the bank of the future. It's not a matter of if it's already, it's a matter of when this big scale transformation starts to happen. And as you pointed out, already in China and different countries in Asia and around the world, mobile payments and mobile banking is a reality. So in that sense, countries like the United States are now being left behind by another divide in terms of finance and capital. This is not just an emerging world opportunity. I think there's a lot to be had if this project succeeds in developed countries as well.
But I want to ask a little bit more about the developing economies, because one thought that I had was, as I looked at this system, I was thinking that the Libra token could be highly disruptive to currencies of developing economies. So do you imagine that if Libra succeeds in the way it's been proposed, that the citizens of these countries would end up preferring to hold Libra over their national currency? And if so, what do you think the effect would be on those countries' currencies?
That's a really, really good question, Laura. 50% of the world's population today are exposed to domestic currency markets and environments where you have anywhere between 10 and upwards in terms of volatility and value swings. And you've seen in just a number of recent examples what failed domestic monetary policy looks like with the collapse of Venezuela. And you also saw Venezuela's Hail Mary pass at creating the Petro, a supposedly asset-backed or oil-backed stablecoin. You've also seen this type of hyperinflation sort of take hold in countries like Zimbabwe and different places around the world. So, the real utility of Libra at no level is meant to create systemic risk nor disrupt financial order in any economy on the planet. Part of the reason that's the case is that, number one, it's not a speculative asset. So every instance of Libra being issued based on a supply and demand function, not a scarcity function, would be backed 1-to-1 with a reserve of stable assets. Obviously, the composition of that reserve is, a long way away from fully determined, but the goal is to create as close to a digital twin of the type of financial stability, central banking independence, again, that you and I might take for granted, and that looked at through the prism of privilege that many of your listeners might understand. That reality isn't the case for billions of people around the planet. And so a financial instrument that is digitally native, that enables that type of facility and certainty, needs to exist if the planet wants to have a global stability and create opportunity for people.
Yeah, I definitely think it could be better for the citizens of those countries. I just wonder how it'll affect their governments. But I actually want to move on because we have limited time. One other thing is that the white paper kind of mentions that this could also form the basis for an identity system. Would that be tied also to Facebook profiles?
I can't, again, I don't think there is a linkage between payment systems and profiles. I think the two things clearly would be firewalled, and, your social media preferences don't constitute, I think, a sufficient burden of proof to stand to meet identity systems. Where we think there are great opportunities with Libra and the Libra blockchain on identity, which of course is another multi-billion person strong opportunity for the world to improve upon, is in the type of KYC mechanisms and in the type of financial mechanisms that all of these wallets and all of the ubiquity of Libra being accepted as a payment instrument around the world creates an opportunity to start triangulating by leveraging government-issued identities and the types of on-ramps that the financial regulators and systems would like into this asset. So implied in Libra being so broadly utilized, or at least has the opportunity to become so broadly utilized, you could really start to also chip away at the identity challenge on the planet, which, like financial inclusion, there's a billion or more people who have no nationally issued ID that isn't interoperable, that has really created a lot of insidious issues, where, again, a network like this and this type of coalition can help address that.
And going back to our conversation about how Libra might find itself in certain sticky situations with governments, what would the Libra Council do in situations like what we've seen with the U.S. sanctions against Iran, where Europe doesn't necessarily support those sanctions and has actually been trying to work around them? If U.S. regulators came to the Libra Association wanting the network to enforce sanctions, I'm just making up a hypothetical example, and European countries didn't, what would the Libra Association do?
That's a good question. So clearly, abiding by prevailing laws, number one, whether they're OFAC sanctions, the Office of Foreign Asset Control at the Treasury Department, or payment sanctions, anti-money laundering issues relating to terrorism finance and all the rest, a network like this will at all times, in my humble opinion, outperform a disaggregated, completely competitive financial system that rides on analog rails. A network like this one will have more to do in advancing compliance standards and advancing sort of the regulatory and risk management standards of modern finance today than the alternative. Status quo has had a very, very long head start, and status quo has stopped at 1.7 billion people without a bank. If trying to resolve for that is wrong, not to sound too coy about it, I think then we have to all look at ourselves in the mirror.
Okay, so it sort of seems like you're saying that there might be cases where it would, for instance, defy the U.S. government wanting... No, not in the least. And I hope that's not what you heard or what your listeners heard. But in the scenario where there's not kind of like global consensus around the sanctions, where some, where certain countries want them and others don't.
Well, so again, the association won't interact with any jurisdiction. The association has three macro level functions: governance, management of the reserve, management of an open source technology. The companies that offer consumers and citizens in different jurisdictions around the world are the regulated entities that provide an on and off ramp to Libra, the currency. Clearly, as the project advances, this really paves the way for the recognition of crypto and digital assets and blockchain projects from a legal and regulatory point of view. And that's one of the reasons you need an uncommon coalition like this one to succeed. But at no level would we suggest that not abiding by prevailing sanctions regimes and all the rest, that would be really the subject of individual wallets and providers in this ecosystem that are all among the most highly regulated entities on the planet.
I couldn't help but notice that there were no banks among the founding members. And honestly, when I first was reading about the system, I thought, oh, this could really disrupt the banking system. So for the reserve, it seems like you actually will need banks and financial institutions to store these reserve assets that back Libra. So how do you get them to help out in a system that could eventually disrupt their business? Or are there other options for holding the reserve assets?
Yeah, so that's a great question as well. The first, I would say that the 28 initial founding members is just that the goal is to build up to a list of 100 organizations by the time Libra is minted and issued, and so you would expect to see in that group of 100 and even more over time, banking institutions, much more opportunities, I think, for market expansion of traditional banking, which is part of what would motivate some of the companies you've seen and some of the organizations you've seen in that initial list of 28. So I think keep an eye on that space and keep an eye on that list of members. And I'm almost certain you'll start to see some household names from banking. The goal here is not to disrupt modern finance. It's to respect the rules of trade, the terms of engagement, and to expand the opportunity collectively to be able to empower billions of people. So that was one point. Clearly, the reserve function and the treasury management function is a very, very substantial part of this that similarly has to comply with prevailing norms in terms of managing assets and keeping things in sort of safe hands in the care, custody, of control of large financial institutions. And so there, too, there will be a very, very clear partnership with banks, central banks, and regulators in targeted geographies around the world.
The association will also be establishing a social impact grant-making program. What kinds of goals are you trying to achieve with that?
Well, that's one of, frankly, from a personal point of view, that is one of the things I'm most excited about, and I think there's a great opportunity there. So the Social Impact Grant Program, again, will be established and will be put in motion, but the idea there is you could envision, for example, partnerships with UNHCR on refugees and sort of the types of large-scale displacements of people that have them lose access to their homes, lose access to normal. And when you have the opportunity to start really plugging in the diaspora communities from around the world through remittance corridors, as one example, if we can give back to the $715 billion global remittance cash flow a couple percentage points in price reduction and an instantaneous delivery like we enjoy with messaging and so on, think about the impact from a social point of view. So those types of innovations and linkages, we think the association can help catalyze through this social impact grant program, among many others. And so we're looking forward to opening up that process as in addition to continuing to recruit nonprofit organizations and social impact organizations as a part of the founding membership.
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing how all of this stuff plays out, from kind of what looks like regulatory headwinds from the outset, but then also what are very ambitious and laudable goals. So thanks for coming on Unconfirmed.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Thanks so much for joining us today. To learn more about the topics we discussed, be sure to check out the links in the show notes of your podcast player. If you haven't yet taken the Unchained survey or entered to win a free CASA node, do so now at surveymonkey.com/r/Unchained survey 2019. Unconfirmed is produced by me, Laura Shin, with help from Fractal Recording, Anthony Yoon, Daniel Nuss, and Rich Straffolino. Thanks for listening.